Good morning and welcome to worship with the congregation of Knox United Church in Kenora. My name is Meg Illman-White and I'm the minister who serves this congregation. Today, November the 8th, is National Aboriginal Veterans Day, a day that particularly lifts up the contributions of Indigenous and Métis veterans. It's a day when we can tell some of their stories and remember what they offered in search of peace. In fact, in search of world peace. Many of us have been collectively holding our breath for the past week and for the weeks and months leading up to the election south of the border. And if anything, this election has highlighted for us how fragile peace is in our world and how vigilant we must continue to be. And that indeed is why on Remembrance Day we lay our wreaths and we take time to remember. Because in remembering, we tell ourselves the story again of how these wars came to be. And we realize that peace is not a fuzzy, warm feeling. Peace can't exist without justice, equity, and equality for all people everywhere around the globe. If the election has highlighted one thing, it is that we all have so much work to do. We know that it's not enough to just relax and say, wow, we dodged that one. We now know that peace is the work of each of us in our own small corner. And my heart goes back to Katie's wonderful singing of Put Peace into Each Other's Hands several weeks ago. How then should we live in Canada and here in Kenora, and what are the demons we must confront in our own country and in our own hearts? Let us prepare our hearts for worship as we light the Christ candle and as each of us in our own places light a candle of remembering and hope. Hope for our lives and hope for the world. Let us worship God. This fall in worship at Knox, we've been exploring some spiritual practices that help us to grow in faith and to live as God's people in the world. One of these practices is that of remembering and telling our stories to our children and our grandchildren. Psalmist today reminds us of that practice. Let us join together in Psalm 78.
Give heed to my teaching, O my people. Turn your ears to the words of my mouth.
I will open my mouth in a parable. I will reveal the hidden meanings of things in the past.
What we have heard and known, what our parents have told us, we will not hide from their grandchildren.
But declare to the next generation the testimony that you gave to Jacob, and the law you appointed in Israel, which you commanded them to teach their children.
That the next generation might know them, children yet unborn, and these in turn should arise and tell their children.
That they should put their trust in you, and not forget your great deeds, but keep all your commandments.
Marvelous things you did in the sight of our ancestors, in the land of Egypt, in the plain of Zoan.
You divided the sea and let them go through, and made the waters stand up like a wall.
By day you led with a cloud, and all the night long with a beacon of fire.
You split rocks in the wilderness, and gave drink in plenty, as farmer did.
You brought streams out of the rock,
and made water run down like rivers.
Today is a day of remembering as we think ahead to Remembrance Day later this week. And as we remember the stories of wars so long ago, and the war that was to be the one to end all wars, and this day, the day to remember so that war would be no more. And yet we know that in our world, wars rage in so many places. And so we remember. We remember those who died, yes, and those who served with gratitude. But we remember also the things that lead us into a place of war and into the absence of peace. When we go through difficult times in life, we can remember back and remind ourselves of the ancestors of our faith. People like Abraham and Sarah, who were called away from home and family and everything familiar and out into a dangerous desert to explore with God a new possibility, a new reality. And they went. And in their travels, they discovered that God is not just here or there, but that all of God is everywhere. We remember that each week in worship as we light our Christ candle, both here and in our own homes. Beyond the stories of Scripture, we have our own stories of faith too, and these are just as important to pass on to our children, to relate to them and to our grandchildren how God has been faithfully present with us in our lives And in our most difficult and heartbreaking times, our times of confusion and uncertainty, and those times when we just don't know what the right thing is. Remembering our past gives us courage as we face the unknown and dangerous present we have lived and waded through this past week. And so we turn now to remember that great communion of saints that surrounds us all, both those who have gone before us and those who are still here among us. Those who served once in the great wars, but also the forgotten ones, the storytellers and the artists, the poets and the hymn writers, the preachers and the teachers, the living ones, ancient and young, who tell us the stories of faith in their own words and from their own hearts, who accompany us through struggle and who light our path. Let us remember as we sing together, O God, our help in ages past, first 3 verses.
Harrison, we're at the Kenora Cenotaph. On November the 11th, at 11 o'clock in the morning, 102 years ago, World War I ended. It was an awful war. All wars are awful. When the war was over, towns and cities all over Canada decided to make cenotaphs like this one, so that they would remember the soldiers, and it would remind us that we never want to have a war again. Since then, Canada has been involved in some other wars: World War II, the Korean War, and also we've been involved in a lot of United Nations peacekeeping efforts. Too many. We're lucky. Kenora and Canada's never had a war on its land. That's not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people wake up, they hear bombs and bullets and gunshots, their houses are exploding, and they're injured and people dying. That happens to them every day. We're lucky that doesn't happen to us. In World War I, poppies started to grow. Poppies are an unusual flower because they don't grow easily. The ground has to be turned up, shoveled up, loosened for the seeds to germinate. Well, in World War I, all of the bombs and the cannon shots and the bullets, and they used a lot of horses, and the men dug up all the land. And poppies started to grow everywhere, millions of them. So, during the World War I, shortly after one of his friends was killed as a soldier, a Canadian military doctor called John McCrae, and he was from Guelph, Ontario, wrote a famous poem in Flanders Fields. That poem was adopted, used by the United States and England and Britain and Canada, and basically we've adopted it. And since then, poppies have been used as a symbol of remembrance of our soldiers and as a reminder and hope for a peaceful future. So Harrison, would you please read in Flanders Fields?
In Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from falling hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us to die, we shall not sleep till poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Thank you, Harrison.
Thank you so much to Bruce and to Harrison. I wonder, as we listen to this so familiar poem, what is the torch that is passed into our hands? What is our quarrel today, and who is our foe? What is the mission that we carry forward to honor those lives who did what they could in a very, very different time in history? Let us now enter into a time of silence and of remembering.
Good morning. A reading from the book of Amos, chapter 5, beginning at the 18th verse. The day of the Lord. Woe to you that long for the day of the Lord. And why do you long for the day of the Lord? That day will be darkness, not light. It will be like running from a lion only to meet a bear, or like getting home safe only to be bitten by a snake. Rest assured, the day of the Lord will be darkness, not light, pitch dark, without a single ray of light. I despise and reject your religious festivals, and your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring me choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Spare me the racket of your chanting, and relieve me the strumming of your harps. Instead, let justice flow like a river, and righteousness like a never-failing stream.
The Gospel reading this morning is from Matthew 23, verses 1 to 12 and 37 to 39. Jesus told the crowds and his disciples, "The religious scholars and the Pharisees have succeeded Moses as teachers. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it. But do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on others' shoulders, while they are unwilling to lift a finger to alleviate them. All their works are performed to be seen, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have the place of honor at banquets, and best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them Rabbi. But you are not to be called Rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all the students. And call no one your mother or father on earth, for you have one parent, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be the one who serves the rest. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you murder the prophets, and you stone those who are sent to you. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing.
In today's gospel lesson that Lindsay just read for us, we hear Jesus giving a teaching that is much needed for his time and for ours. He lifts up the reality that in his day, the teachers and the Pharisees were more concerned with show than they were with actually internalizing their own spiritual practice and applying those to their own lives. Now you might wonder what phylacteries and fringes are. Phylacteries are black boxes, small black boxes with some scripture in them. And these are attached to the forehead, much like a headlamp would be, with black straps. And then to the forearm as well. Now it might be your right hand if you're left-handed, or your left hand if you're right-handed. But either way, the black box is placed on the inside of the hand so that when you put your hand to your heart, the black box comes into contact with your heart. And the idea of phylacteries was that people would always remember the scriptures that were before them and that were part of their lives and that they were trying to hold close to their hearts. But Jesus was noticing that sometimes the religious leaders and teachers weren't doing that. Rather, they were trying to make a show out of it. And so their phylacteries were broad and their fringes were long, and it was all about showing off and making others aware of how good they were. Jesus is putting forth a teaching to help us to understand, to truly understand that spiritual practice is that which connects us to the source of our being, to the source of our life and our love, and that is of ultimate importance. He's asking us to consider that our own personal needs are not as important as the needs of the community. He's asking us to understand that peace is a result of justice and fairness and equity for all. That where one is not served, the whole cannot thrive. And so, the instruction to go out as servants in the world and to live in ways that gather community, build up community, and hold one another in the never-ending love of God. Jesus ends this passage by saying, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you murder the prophets and you stone those who are sent to you." He knows how hard these teachings are to grasp for all of us. And he knows that we get in our own way. I wonder how remembering your stories and telling them to your children has allowed you to grow in faith and to understand those experiences more fully. And I wonder how those stories have influenced your children and the way that they move through the world. Today calls us to remember the stories of faith of our ancestors, the stories of those who have gone before us, who have given of themselves fully and wholeheartedly, and the stories of our own lives. The stories particularly of those times when God has come into our tragic moments, our most difficult moments, and has walked through them with us, making those times the pillars of our lives upon which we can build our present and a future with confidence and with hope.
Put peace into each other's hands, and like a treasure hold it, protect it like a candle flame, with tenderness enfold it. Put peace into each other's hands, with loving expectation. Be gentle in the words and ways, in touch with God's creation. Put peace into each other's hands, like bread we break for sharing. The people warmly in the eye, our life is meant for caring. Give thanks for strong yet tender hearts, held out in trust and blessing. Where words fall short, let hands speak out the heights and love expressing. Reach out in friendship, stay with faith, in touch those around you. Put peace into each other's hands, the peace that sought and found you.
Abiding God, we collect our thoughts for prayer and open ourselves to your presence in anxious times. Where we, in our corner, as in every corner of the world, continue to wade through unprecedented worry and measures of protection from pandemic spread. We add to this continued community concern and loss, a community who feels keenly our inability to risk collecting together in support of one another in our worry, illness, healing, celebration, or loss. Herb Trent has died this week. In such a short space of time after the loss of Shirley, we hold Kelly, Karen, their family, and closest friends in our tender concern. So too our Knox family is absorbing the loss of Ralph Mosier, a constant and assuring presence among us. With his 95th birthday approaching, and after 70 years of marriage to Margaret, it is hard to imagine life forward without his place in it. She, their children and grandchildren, we hold up to you with our shared memories and gratitude. we add to these griefs our world's moment. Our world has held its breath as we've watched our neighbors of the United States be more ununited in vision than in more than 100 years, and in the midst of this unmeasurable pandemic. Democracy itself as an idea has been and still hangs in the balance. The insidious rise of protectionism, violent and supremacist permissions, and more, threatening the very safety of their citizens. May the results of this election make it easier again to parent to children of color, of any and all faith and cultural traditions, and easier to grandparent. For it is grandparents, theirs, ours, and others, the world around, who offered and who gave their lives in armed conflict to protect and safeguard all of these things. This week, as we pause in our ceremonies of remembrance, it has all been brought keenly forward again. When we offer our silence, it will, as always, be out of respect and reverence for those who stood against what would threaten inclusion, safety, and worth. When we don our poppies this year, may we again truly receive the "lest we forget" intention. For we have only just seen, on our doorstep, how quickly that our forgetting can open the way to injustice, intolerance, and insecurity. In this act, may we receive again your call to us to live into hope and to be, in our time, your presence and your radical love. What a gracious thing it is to know that all of these, our worries, anxieties, and griefs, can be brought to you, you who, closer than our very breathing, know our inmost desires for ourselves and others, and carry them vouchsafe to one another. Through change, challenge, and loss, we thank you that we have been taught by you, through the life and measure of Jesus Christ, how to be, how to belong, how to become, and how to pray together, singing.
Go now to remember the stories of faith. And even when we cannot gather here, to tell them to your children and your grandchildren. And may the blessing of the God of journey go with you into the unknown, the unconditional love of Jesus guide all your encounters, and the inspiration of the Spirit leads you out to touch the world with justice and with peace. Amen.